On January 26th, 2026, a 90-year-old man posted something on X that left the entire soccer world stunned. It wasn't a pundit. It wasn't a journalist looking for clicks. It was Sepp Blatter, the man who ran FIFA for 17 years, who oversaw 5 World Cups across 5 continents, who knows the internal machinery of that organization better than almost anyone alive. He quoted Swiss attorney and anti-corruption expert Marc Pieth, the lawyer who had personally overseen FIFA's internal reform process between 2013 and 2016, and added his own signature beneath the words. The message was simple and devastating. For the fans, there's only one piece of advice: stay away from the USA. I think Marc Pieth is right to question this World Cup. This was not a press release. It was not an institutional statement carefully worded by communications teams. It was the former president of FIFA, the man who built and protected that institution for nearly 2 decades, publicly telling the world that the tournament his organization created, in the country his organization chose as its primary host, was a place fans should not go. Pieth had been even more specific in his earlier interview with the Swiss newspaper Der Bund. He told readers that fans would see it better on television anyway, and that those who did make the trip should know that if they didn't please the authorities upon arrival, they would be put on the next flight home, if they were lucky. That phrase, "if they're lucky," landed like a grenade in the international soccer press. That is not background noise. That is an explosion coming from inside the house of soccer itself. To understand how things got to this point, you have to understand where the doubt was before, because for years, the doubt wasn't pointed at the United States. It was pointed at Mexico. When the announcement came that the 2026 World Cup would be a joint tournament hosted by the United States, Mexico, and Canada, the questions about preparedness piled onto Mexico from every direction: security, infrastructure, logistics, violence. Every concern, every skeptical headline, every worried editorial pointed south of the Rio Grande. And now, 3 days before the start of the largest World Cup in the history of the tournament, the reality has flipped completely. Mexico City is preparing to open the tournament on June 11th at Estadio Azteca, one of the most iconic soccer venues on the planet, a stadium that has hosted 2 World Cup finals and has witnessed some of the most extraordinary moments in the sport's history. The Mexican supporters who will fill that stadium represent a passion for the game that genuinely has no equal anywhere in the world. The preparation on the Mexican side, despite real complications, including labor protests by the CTM union on Paseo de la Reforma and a tense domestic political environment, has been generating consistently positive evaluations from international observers. Toronto and Vancouver, the Canadian host cities, have received strong and consistent marks in their preparation reports. In both Mexico and Canada, soccer is genuine, deep, and massive. It's not an imported product. It's not a marketing campaign. It is a lived reality that runs through generations. Meanwhile, in the 11 host cities on the American side of the tournament, hotel reservation numbers are running below projections, by 80% in some markets. In Kansas City, bookings have actually come in below what a normal summer weekend without any major event would generate. And it is against that backdrop that the former president of FIFA is going on the record to tell the world to stay home. So, what happened? How did the most commercially powerful sports tournament on earth arrive at this moment? The answer has several distinct layers, and each one compounds the last. The first layer is ticket pricing, and the story there is genuinely without precedent in World Cup history. FIFA introduced dynamic pricing for the first time ever at a men's World Cup. For fans who had been saving for years, who had been planning travel, booking vacation time, setting aside money across 4 years of anticipation, the experience of actually trying to buy tickets was a shock. You would open the FIFA ticketing platform, add a ticket to your cart, and watch the price climb in real time before you could complete the purchase. The cheapest group stage tickets were initially advertised at $60, but that price existed in a tier so limited it functioned more as a headline than a reality. The most expensive seats for the final climbed toward $8,000 per ticket. Resale listings on FIFA's own platform, because FIFA built its own secondary marketplace, have reportedly exceeded $30,000 for certain final tickets, for a single seat. To put that in historical context, attending all 7 matches of the 2022 Qatar World Cup, from group stage through final, cost somewhere between roughly $1,500 and $4,000 at the lowest and mid-tiers. The equivalent journey through the 2026 tournament, according to analysis by Football Supporters Europe, runs from over $5,000 at the cheapest level to more than $12,000 at the highest. In a single tournament cycle, the financial barrier to experiencing the World Cup in person roughly tripled. Football Supporters Europe, one of the most established and respected fan organizations in the world, representing supporters from across the continent, did not simply publish an angry tweet. They did not organize a social media campaign. They filed a formal complaint with the European Commission, joined by Euroconsumers, a major consumer advocacy organization. The complaint accused FIFA of exploiting its monopoly position to impose exorbitant ticket prices alongside unclear and unjust purchasing conditions that would be considered illegal in a competitive marketplace. They cited 6 specific abuses, including what they called bait advertising, the practice of promoting a $60 price that was never genuinely accessible to the general public. That is a formalized legal action moving through the proper regulatory channels of the European Union. FIFA's official response was that its pricing reflected the reality of the North American market. That explanation landed with all the warmth and resonance of a form letter, particularly among the millions of fans who had spent 4 years planning and saving around a completely different set of expectations. The second layer is access, and here the tension goes well beyond price points and economic frustration. Supporters of 4 national teams that qualified for this World Cup, Iran, Haiti, Ivory Coast, and Senegal, cannot obtain tourist visas to enter the United States. This is a direct consequence of travel ban proclamations issued by the Trump administration that restrict entry to nationals of 39 countries. Players receive an exemption. Fans, journalists covering those teams, and in many cases, immediate family members of players do not. The Iranian case became especially emblematic. The Iranian Football Federation formally boycotted the World Cup draw in December of 2025 after multiple officials, including the Federation president, were denied visas to attend. FIFA was formally notified of the situation and stated it would review the matter with urgency. No changes followed. For many fans from countries not on the outright ban list, the visa process still proved enormously difficult. Processing times stretched for weeks. Embassy staff worked extended hours trying to manage the volume of applications. The uncertainty around whether a visa would arrive before the tournament began drove thousands of supporters to abandon travel plans they had been building for years. These are not hypothetical travelers. They are people with tickets already purchased, with flights researched, with hotels identified, who simply could not get through the front door. The third layer arrived on March 30th, 2026, and it transformed what had been a debate about prices and paperwork into something of a fundamentally different scale. Amnesty International published a report titled, "Humanity Must Win: Defending Rights and Addressing Repression at the FIFA World Cup 2026. In that document, one of the most recognized human rights organizations in the world described the current situation in the United States as a human rights emergency. The report documented what it called paramilitary-style immigration raids, mass detentions, and arrests carried out by masked and armed agents from ICE and CBP, Immigration and Customs Enforcement and Customs and Border Protection. It documented deportations that, in the first year of Trump's second term, surpassed 500,000 people. Steve Cockburn, the organization's head of economic and social justice, warned that the record-breaking deportation numbers had generated a climate of fear that could affect any person traveling to the United States during the tournament, regardless of their immigration status or the purpose of their visit. For LGBTQ+ supporters specifically, Amnesty's report stated plainly that it is not safe to display visible public presence in the United States during this period. FIFA, whose own statutes contain a stated commitment to the respect of all internationally recognized human rights, did not issue a specific response to the report. The fourth layer surfaced with particular force in the weeks leading up to the tournament, and it landed with the heaviest resonance in Europe: environmental criticism. A serious independent analysis published this week warned that the 2026 World Cup stands to meaningfully worsen the global climate crisis at a moment when scientists and governments are calling for urgent and immediate reductions in emissions. The argument is concrete, not abstract. A tournament featuring 48 national teams competing across 3 countries that are geographically dispersed in ways that no previous World Cup host has required, with 78 matches concentrated in 11 American cities, demands an extraordinary volume of air travel for teams, for media, for corporate delegations, and ideally, for hundreds of thousands of fans. FIFA promotes sustainability as a central organizational value. The architecture of the tournament it designed produces tens of thousands of additional flights. That contradiction between the institution's stated values and the operational reality of its own format is difficult to dismiss, and for a substantial portion of European supporters, where environmental consciousness is a genuine and growing priority, it has become a reason to stay home that goes beyond politics. It was within that compounding context, prices, access, human rights, environment, that something happened that has no precedent in the recent history of the World Cup. 20 leaders of European soccer federations became involved in formal conversations about a boycott of this tournament. Not 20 social media accounts with strong opinions. 20 leaders of the organizations that represent the national associations of countries with some of the deepest soccer cultures on earth. Germany, France, the Netherlands, Belgium. Countries whose traveling supporters have historically been among the most dedicated, vibrant, and economically significant in every World Cup over the last 3 decades. Gutlich, vice president of the German Football Federation and president of FC St. Pauli, stated publicly in January that the time had come for a serious conversation about a boycott. Mogens Jensen, a Danish member of parliament, said that if the United States escalated its conflict over Greenland, a boycott would need to be considered, and considered very, very seriously. In France, left-wing political leader Jean-Luc Mélenchon called for a boycott if Trump proceeded with tariff measures targeting European economies. The German Football Federation ultimately ruled out a boycott on January 31st, releasing a statement expressing its belief in the unifying power of sport. But the fact that the conversation traveled as far as it did, that it was formalized between 20 federation leaders, not just floated in op-eds and television panels, has no parallel in the modern era of the sport. FIFA's historical response to situations like this has always been consistent and ultimately successful. The tournament will happen, soccer will win, and history backs that up. The 1978 World Cup was held in Argentina under a military dictatorship, while human rights organizations publicly called for an international boycott. The tournament happened, the games were played, the Netherlands reached the final. Russia 2018 generated enormous anxiety in the years and months before it began. The Russian cities that international fans had never visited, Kazan, Saransk, Nizhny Novgorod, turned out to be genuinely welcoming. Supporters who made the trip came home saying it was one of the finest World Cup experiences of their lives. Qatar 2022 was arguably the most prolonged and intense pre-tournament controversy of the modern era. The debates about worker deaths, LGBTQ rights, the decision-making process that led to Qatar's selection, and the climatic absurdity of playing a soccer World Cup in the desert in November ran for more than a decade. The tournament happened. The group stage delivered some of the most remarkable upsets and dramatic moments in the tournament's history. Morocco reached the semifinals. The pattern is consistent. FIFA's institutional capacity to organize a functioning tournament through serious turbulence is well established. The World Cup has survived political upheaval, human rights controversies, logistical nightmares, and global media campaigns designed to delegitimize it. It has always come out the other side, with the games having been played. But here is where an additional historical element deserves attention, because it matters for understanding what is genuinely different about 2026. At no point in the history of the tournament, not in Argentina, not in Russia, not in Qatar, did a former FIFA president publicly recommend to fans that they not attend matches at the primary host country. In every previous controversy, the institution closed ranks. Former officials either stayed quiet or defended the organization. Current leadership presented a united front. What is happening in 2026 broke that pattern. The man who ran FIFA for 17 years went on record to tell fans to stay home. But what makes 2026 structurally different from those historical comparisons is not the political magnitude of the controversy. It is the nature of the concerns themselves. In Argentina, in Russia, in Qatar, the debate centered on the political system of the host nation, or on the ethics of the selection process. Those concerns, as serious as they were, tended to feel somewhat removed from the lived experience of the fans who did attend. You could arrive, watch extraordinary soccer, feel the atmosphere of an international tournament, and come home having had an experience that felt real and worthwhile, even while knowing the politics of how it got there were compromised. What is happening in 2026 is different in texture. It is the ticket you couldn't afford after saving for 4 years, watching the price on your screen go up while the ticket sat in your cart. It is the visa that never came and the trip you had to cancel. It is the hotel room that FIFA itself canceled months before the tournament began as part of its accommodation management program. It is the fans of 4 qualified national teams who simply cannot enter the host country, not because of geopolitics in the abstract, but because of specific executive orders signed in Washington. It is the personal frustration of real people who wanted to be in those stadiums and found the road blocked by decisions made for reasons that had nothing to do with the love of the game. And while all of that is unfolding on the American side of the tournament, a parallel story is developing, one that the broadcast cameras are going to make very visible, very quickly. Mexico is ready. Canada is ready. Estadio Azteca will be full on June 11th in ways that no corporate production budget can manufacture. The energy in that stadium will be real. It will be earned by a century of Mexican soccer culture, by generations of fans who have lived and breathed this game through every political and economic cycle the country has endured. Vancouver and Toronto have generated consistently positive preparation reports. In both countries, the tournament feels like a genuine cultural event, not a commercial import. The contrast between that authenticity and the uncertain, corporate, partially empty atmosphere that could emerge in some American venues, where sections reserved for visiting supporters may have more empty seats than any World Cup in recent memory, will be visible on every television broadcast of every game played in the United States. The soccer itself promises to deliver its own powerful narratives on the North American side. Mexico opens the tournament against South Africa in what represents one of the most significant generational renewals El Tri has undergone in decades. 17-year-old Gilberto Mora could become the youngest Mexican player ever to appear in a World Cup. Santiago Jimenez, the striker that Mexican supporters have been waiting for throughout a long period of transition, arrives as the team's offensive centerpiece with legitimate international pedigree. Canada debuts against Bosnia and Herzegovina in Toronto, with Jonathan David, the highest all-time scorer in Canadian national team history, with 39 international goals, as the focal point of an attack that has genuine World Cup ambitions. Alphonso Davies, the game's most electrifying wide player on his best days, is recovering from injury, but confirmed on the roster. 2 national teams with powerful stories to tell, playing in front of their own people, in their own cities, with the kind of genuine home crowd support that transforms a match from a sporting event into something closer to a collective emotional experience. That contrast between the authentic, vibrant soccer culture of Mexico and Canada and the more uncertain, more corporate, more logistically complicated picture at a significant portion of American venues will, if the current data holds, be part of the permanent legacy of this World Cup. Not what happened on the field, but the question of whether the organization that administers the most popular sport on Earth chose to prioritize record-breaking commercial revenue over the people who built the reputation of this game over the course of more than 100 years. Sepp Blatter, the man who ran that organization for 17 years, who knows its successes and its failures and its compromises better than almost anyone, believed the answer to that question was already obvious. He published it on X on January 26th for the entire world to read. The games are about to begin. The stadiums will have people in them. Goals will be scored. History will be made on the field, as it always is at a World Cup. But what surrounds this tournament? The prices, the bans, the human rights warnings, the empty hotels, the formal legal complaints, the unprecedented call from a former FIFA president telling fans to stay home. That context is not going away. It will be present in every broadcast, in every discussion, in every comparison between a packed Azteca and a half-empty stadium somewhere in the American Midwest. And when historians of the sport look back at the 2026 World Cup, they will have to reckon with the full picture. Not just the goals, all of it.